In August of 2022, a man in shackles, hands cuffed to his waist, ankles chained, walked out the back door of a police holding facility in Ankara, Turkey, flanked by 4 officers. He was loaded onto a chartered private jet, bound for Darwin, Australia, a city more than 13,000 kilometers from the one he'd just been dragged out of. For the previous 6 years, this man had lived like royalty: Dubai penthouses, Northern Cyprus villas, a new Turkish Cypriot wife, bribes paid to the right officials, encrypted phones humming on his marble coffee tables while he ran the most powerful outlaw Bikie gang in the southern hemisphere from his poolside. He had called himself the commander of the world. He had told his own club that no chapter could open, no member could be promoted without his personal permission. And now, as the jet climbed out of Turkish airspace, this man understood, for the first time in 6 years, that none of it had mattered. The country that had sheltered him had sold him out. The gang he had commanded had already chosen his replacement, and waiting for him on the runway in Darwin were the 2 things he had spent 6 years trying to outrun: the Australian Federal Police, and a charge that carried a maximum sentence of life in prison. This is the story of Mark Buttle, the self-proclaimed supreme commander of the world, and how the one country he thought would never give him up did exactly that. If you love stories like this, real downfalls, real betrayals, the hidden side of Sydney's underworld, make sure you subscribe to Sydney Crime. New stories every week. Mark Douglas Buttle was born in 1984 in Maroubra, one of the grittier pockets of Sydney's eastern suburbs. His family lived in public housing commission, as Australians call it, the kind of working-class upbringing that tends to narrow a young man's options down to 2. Either you leave the neighborhood and never look back, or you stay and you fight for whatever territory you can grab. Mark chose the second. By his late teens, he had drifted into the Comanchero Motorcycle Club, Australia's most feared one-percenter outlaw Bikie gang, founded in Sydney in the 1960s and hardened through decades of war with rival clubs. It was the kind of organization where loyalty was measured in blood, hierarchy was enforced with fists, and territory was defended with firearms. And Mark Buttle, from his very first day as a prospect, was comfortable with all 3. Australian journalist Chris Graham once noted a single detail about Mark Buttle that told you everything about the man. In a public brawl on the streets of Sydney in 2010, Buttle, as he often liked to do, took his shirt off before the fight started. When police reviewed the CCTV footage afterward, they had no trouble identifying him, because the word Buttle was tattooed across his bare chest in letters 6 inches high. He had, in other words, tattooed his own surname onto his own body, presumably, Graham wrote, so that he would never forget it. This was not a master criminal. This was a street-level brawler who happened to be exceptionally violent, exceptionally loud, and exceptionally good at climbing a ladder made of other men's broken bones. By 2011, he had reached the top of that ladder. After the previous Comanchero national president, Duax Ngakuru, fled Australia for Turkey, the membership elected Mark Buttle as the new national president of the Comancheros. He was 27 years old, but the Comancheros had one very specific problem, and it traced back to an event that had happened 1 year earlier, an event that would haunt Mark Buttle for the rest of his life. In the early morning of June 7, 2010, shortly after 6 a.m., a 59-year-old armored van security guard named Gary Alabon arrived on Sussex Street in the Sydney CBD to begin his cash pickup route. He was months away from retirement. He and his wife, Monica, had plans for holidays, plans for grandchildren, plans for the long, quiet years they had spent 4 decades saving for. Gary Alabon would never see any of it. Before he could finish his first pickup of the morning, he was ambushed by armed men during a cash-in-transit heist. According to witnesses, Alabon raised his hands in surrender. He complied with every demand the robbers made, and then, despite his full compliance, one of the men shot him in the back, at point-blank range, stole his work-issued firearm, and fled. Gary Alabon died on Sussex Street that morning. His widow Monica would later say in a written statement that the grief of losing Gary had never subsided, and that the people who knew what had happened, she believed, were still out there, still alive, and still not talking. New South Wales police soon identified Mark Buttle as a person of interest in Gary Alabon's murder. They never charged him. The evidence wasn't there. But NSW police believed and said publicly that Buttle could identify the men who had pulled the trigger. The New South Wales government eventually offered a $1 million reward for information on Alabon's murder. No one has ever come forward, and Gary Alabon's killers have never been named. Over the next 5 years, Mark Buttle built the Comancheros into something his predecessors had never managed. He turned the gang into a transnational crime syndicate. He opened chapters across Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and New Zealand. He linked arms with Sydney-born Turkish-Australian drug lord Hakan Ayik, who was by then operating from Istanbul. He linked arms with his old predecessor Duax Ngakuru, also hiding in Turkey. Together, these three men, all of them tied back to Sydney's working-class suburbs, formed the core of what the Australian Federal Police would eventually call the Aussie Cartel. They moved cocaine from South America, they moved methamphetamine from Asia, they moved heroin from the Middle East, and they moved tons of all of it every single year into Australia. But Buttle himself was running out of room in his home country. Every year, the Alabon murder remained officially unsolved. Every year, the NSW police continued to publicly call Mark Buttle a person of interest in a killing they could not pin on him. And every year, the pressure increased. By early 2016, Buttle had decided Australia was no longer home. On February 1st of that year, he boarded a flight and left the country. He would not return for 6.5 years. He settled first in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, with its luxury towers, its weak extradition links to Australia, and its endless supply of other international fugitives, had by then become the preferred retirement home for senior Australian underworld figures. From a Dubai penthouse, Buttle attempted to do something no Comanchero president had ever done before. He tried to run the gang from offshore. He appointed a committee to handle day-to-day Australian operations, Tarek Zahid as National Sergeant-at-Arms, Mick Murray as Melbourne Chapter President, Alan Meehan as Sydney Chapter President. He sent orders by encrypted text message. He demanded to personally approve every promotion, every new chapter, every major decision. In September 2017, he sent a single text to every Comanchero in Australia that read, "I'm the fucking commander of the world. No one is to touch another member or set up another chapter without my permission." The media grabbed the line and never let go. Soon, Australian tabloids were calling him Australia's Dr. Evil. The Comancheros themselves started calling him the Supreme Commander of the World. Some said it in awe, others said it in mockery, but Buttle himself took the title seriously. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in San Diego, California, the FBI was quietly building something that would eventually unmake him. In 2018, the FBI launched what would become the most successful sting operation in modern law enforcement history, an encrypted phone platform called ANOM, distributed globally to organized crime figures by Hakan Ayik himself and silently monitored in real time by American and Australian police. Buttle became one of ANOM's highest-profile users. From his Dubai penthouse, he sent thousands of encrypted messages, and every single one of them was being read, in real time, the moment it left his phone. In 2021, in a text later made public by the AFP, Buttle allegedly called for the Comancheros to set up their own version of the American Mafia's famous Commission, an international body to regulate the price of drugs inside Australia. He complained that the street price of methamphetamine had dropped from 250,000 Australian dollars per kilogram to just 80,000, and in his own words, it was happening because, quote, "there is no structure, no rules, no reasoning, and to be honest, there's no sense." By the time Buttle sent that message, he had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. In May 2021, Buttle and his associates attempted to orchestrate a cocaine shipment of 160 kilograms from Hong Kong into Melbourne via Sydney. The AFP, using intelligence gathered through ANOM, seized the entire shipment before it ever reached an Australian buyer. The street value was estimated at 40 million Australian dollars. The shipment never arrived. And inside AFP headquarters in Canberra, Mark Buttle's name was now at the very top of a brand new target list, a list belonging to a secret task force called Operation Gain, which had been specifically designed to hunt down Australian organized crime figures hiding overseas. A few months later, in Dubai, Mark Buttle made the single mistake that cost him everything. At a luxury resort poolside, he became involved in a drunken brawl with a group of tourists. Someone filmed it. The video went viral. Suddenly, the same Emirati authorities who had quietly tolerated his presence for 5 years were being publicly forced to notice him. Fearing arrest, Buttle fled. Over the next few weeks, he moved through Greece, Iraq, Lebanon, and Turkey, burning bridges and passports. And on July 7, 2021, he crossed into one of the strangest jurisdictions on earth, the self-declared Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, a breakaway state recognized by only one country on the planet, which happened to be Turkey, a place with no extradition treaty with Australia, a refuge known quietly inside the underworld as a final stopping point for international fugitives. Northern Cypriot politicians granted Buttle temporary residency on the grounds that his high income would bring wealth to the territory. He bought a villa. He married a Turkish Cypriot woman. He paid bribes to local officials. He would later openly admit this through his own defense lawyer. And for a full year, Mark Buttle believed he had found the one country on earth that would never sell him out. He was wrong. In July of 2022, Northern Cyprus formally issued a press release announcing that Mark Buttle's presence had become, quote, inconvenient in terms of public peace and security. On July 9th, he was arrested in a coordinated raid, bundled into a police vehicle, and deported across the Turkish-recognized border into mainland Turkey. Turkish authorities took him to Ankara, and from there, Turkey, which also has no extradition treaty with Australia, made what the AFP Assistant Commissioner Nigel Ryan would later carefully describe as an, quote, independent decision to deport Buttle on a chartered AFP flight escorted by Turkish security officers. Mark Buttle was flown from Ankara to Darwin. He landed on Australian soil on August 3, 2022, for the first time in 6.5 years. He was arrested the moment he stepped off the plane. Within days, he was transferred under heavy security to Melbourne, where he was formally charged with 2 offenses: importing a commercial quantity of a border-controlled drug and conspiring to import a commercial quantity of a border-controlled drug. Both charges carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. He was remanded at Barwon Prison, the same maximum security Victorian facility that has housed some of Australia's most dangerous inmates. Bail was denied, and denied again, and denied again. As of today, Mark Buttle remains inside Barwon Prison in maximum security conditions, still awaiting trial. No sentencing has occurred. In 2023, the Comancheros replaced him as Supreme Commander with another senior member named Alex Vare. His long-term partner, Mel Terwisha, a former NRL cheerleader and the mother of his children, left him after learning he had married the Turkish Cypriot woman in Cyprus. And in August 2025, Terwisha herself was charged by Australian federal authorities with dealing in the proceeds of crime, allegedly linked to assets tied to Buttle's operations. She faces up to 25 years in prison if convicted. Meanwhile, in a quiet home in Sydney, Gary Alabin's widow, Monica, is still waiting. 16 years after her husband was shot in the back on Sussex Street, no one has ever been charged with his murder. The $1 million reward from the NSW government still stands. The people who know what happened are, in her own words, still robbing her of justice. Whether Mark Buttle was one of them has never been established in any court of law. In the underworld, men like Mark Buttle believe their power comes from their reputation. They believe that the right tattoo on the right chest, the right title in the right text message, and the right villa in the right unrecognized country will keep them safe forever. But reputation only works on the people who choose to respect it. And when an international sting operation and a country that never signed your extradition treaty decide to move against you at the same time, the commander of the world is just another handcuffed man on a chartered plane he didn't choose to board. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, the downfalls, the betrayals, the crossings of borders that end with someone sitting in a cell on the other side of the world, make sure you subscribe to Sydney Crime so you never miss a downfall. The next video on your screen is one you won't want to miss. I'll see you there.